Okay, so we'll start again. So we're been talking about the spiritual teacher. As I mentioned before, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, well, it was clarified. He said that this term Shenyin Densu, right? This is translated into English often as guru devotion, but Rinpoche said, really, to be very clear, it should be correct relation to the spiritual friend. So it's understanding how to relate best, and this, it's not an easy thing. It's not just a simple question of just do whatever the person says, although it's very useful in a relationship with a spiritual teacher to try to follow their advice as much as possible, but it's not so simple. It's just you do what they say. You have to cultivate your mind a lot, and there are pitfalls that you can fall into. So I was saying last week about it's very useful to look at examples of people. I was thinking, if we look at some of the people who've been here over the years, that's certainly been a major factor. The people who've been able to stay here, at least among the foreigners, people who've been able to stay for many years at Sera, all of them have had quite a strong relationship with their teacher. So I mentioned last week in Namdak and Jampa Kelden, in both those cases, again, Namdak with many teachers, but in each case he was very, very careful to maintain very pure relationship. I think that was very obvious just speaking with him and from relating with him. I think in Namdak his name was quite apt, right? Namdak meaning pure, and in a lot of ways that was quite stood out just being around him. And then when again Jampa Kelden, as I was saying, his relationship with Khyentse Rinpoche, you could see that was just the central purpose of his life was to follow his teachings, and whenever he spoke with him, you would see him fold his hands, and it's still today it's like speaking about his father. And then also, of course, with again Laksok, very devoted to both to Lama Lundrup was his main teacher before, and then when he passed away, of course, and he had Lama Zopa Rinpoche as his teacher all along, but after Gache Lama Lundrup had passed away, then he was mainly relying on Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and we could see how he reacted when Rinpoche passed away. Of course, not devastated. It wasn't like he became, he didn't get depressed or anything like that, but he was clearly very emotional about it for quite a while. And we see with again Namjong that with both his teachers, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and then with again Jime Sering, he was a very, very close relationship, unusual. Most of the monks that I've known here haven't had such a strong relationship with their Kachiken, but with him that was what kept him going here at Sera was this motivation from his teacher. So a lot of you don't know in the early years, you weren't here, but you saw how hard he worked the first few years at Sera, how much effort he was putting into the program and energy he put into things here. And a lot of that had to do with his inspiration, because you might know I don't know if any of you know actually, that his original teacher was Geshe Zonam Rinchen at the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives up in Dharamsala. That's when I first met him, and then when I came down to Sera first, and then we talked about, I came back to Dharamsala at the end of the year and told him about the experiences down here, and he seemed quite excited to come down. So he asked Zonam Rinchen, and he said, yeah, go down there. And he said, there's this new Gache Jime Tsering, he's my student, and I have complete faith in him, so you just follow whatever he says. And that's exactly what he did. He got down here and immediately followed exactly what again Jime Tsering said for many years, and was it was you could see that it was a very he related to him like how do you say it was not just a intellectual teacher relationship. It was a very personal thing, and always kept a very pure view of the teacher. which is essential. So yeah, all of them had been able to stay here many years. And I think that's essential to have that motivating factor. But as I also had mentioned before, I think at Sera, part of it also is that it's not just necessarily one person. One of the issues we get sometimes, I say issue, that doesn't sound nice, but one of the differences I see when people who are practicing in Western Dharma centers is that they have one relationship maybe with one teacher, but it's very different when you're here in the monastery, when you have a whole network of people. And so you don't necessarily have to have all your focus on that one person. You have many people who are guiding you. And so I could say for myself, of course, my main teacher was Chöden Rinpoche. And when Rinpoche passed away, of course, it was a bit of a shock. It wasn't a huge shock. It wasn't something we weren't expecting. And I was a bit sad at one point when I went to view Rinpoche's holy body after he completed his meditation. But I didn't feel any sense of discouragement. I knew that Rinpoche told me to be here, and it was easy to continue with that. And likewise with the Lama Zopa Rinpoche passed away this year. I know a lot of people that I'd heard about were quite devastated. It was, for me, it was hard a bit because I'd actually known Lama Zopa Rinpoche for a very long time. I'd had for about 20 years he'd been my teacher, and had quite a strong impact on me when I first met him, that it quite shifted the direction of my life, even though I already knew I wanted to be a monk before that, but still it had quite a strong impact on my life. So I started to recall some of the early memories of the advice he gave me. So there was some sadness, and I was surprised. It was like losing a member of my family, I would say. I'd forgotten how important I'd been in my life. But I never felt any sense of, now I don't know what to do or what to do next. It was very clear. I had gotten clear advice from Rinpoche of what to do and to continue here. Of course, I would say I have many other teachers now in the monastery. My closest teacher at this point is Geshe Ngawan Sangye, who's Alpha Kyume. But at this point, I don't feel such a need to have a particular relationship with one person. But the monastery is very important. I still feel I'm not ready to leave the monastery at this point in my life. And the monastery becomes your teacher, and it's sort of, Chöden Rinpoche was very clear, this is your path, is to be here at Sera. And I feel that manifests, he manifests in my life here. It's in my life in the Kangzin, which were almost everyone in the Kangzin who was here when he was alive is a student. And obviously now there's some people who are younger who weren't there, but it's clearly that the Kangzin is geared towards following his advice, and we can see that with the older monks in the Kangzin too. It's one very fortunate thing we have in Lower Kangzin is we have a lot of very serious practitioners. A lot of the Geshes were close students of Rinpoche, and I think to a large extent because of the motivating force of his practice and his example. A lot of them spend a lot of years in retreat. Some of you might know, I don't know if you were aware of this, Geshe Senge a few years ago, who was the brother of one of the monks over here in the Labrang. He passed away a few years ago in Dharamsala. He had been in retreat about 20 years, but nobody had any, and not that he thought there was anything wrong with his practice, but nobody thought there was anything special. It wasn't like he came back and showed this air of being a realized being. But he had been just, I don't think he had been a Laram Geshe, he'd just been a regular Geshe. And then had gone off to Dharamsala to do retreat, and every once in a while he'd come back here and visit. He was quite reserved, didn't show anything special. But when he died, he was in Tukdam for 8 days. They actually had you might have heard about this situation. Maybe you didn't know who he was, but he was in the hospital in Dharamsala. So there was actually doctors and the scientific team that I think Richard Davidson had sent over. They examined for 8 days the signs of him being in Tukdam. So that's sort of what happens if you relate properly to the teacher. I think it's there's a lot of blessing in that. So I think what it says in the LAM.RIM is really something to reflect upon. Sometimes people find it, as I talked about before, with Lamaism. I think Tibetan Buddhism is such emphasis on relating to the teacher, but it's a misunderstanding. As we see, Tsongkhapa, he's constantly quoting the Indian text, so it's not it's not a Tibetan innovation to have this important relationship with the teacher, and really it's there in other traditions as well. It's maybe it's not. I'm not as explicit, although I'm not sure about that. We can see how in any Buddhist tradition, there's very strong emphasis. We've been reading in the Vinaya over and over again about the importance of relating with one's teacher and how that works. It doesn't have this same tantric element, but at the same time, it's not that different in terms of the view of the teacher and holding them as being the Buddha in person guiding you. So I don't know. Maybe I don't know if I've said anything too profound today. I just thought it was nice to reflect on these points as we come back to the text. We finished right in the middle of this explanation. We were talking about the 10 qualities of the teacher. And so it's always good to remember where we are in the text. And so we had the four major sections of the text, right? We had the first reflecting on the qualities of the teaching and the purity of the teaching and the person who taught it. These were all the introductory points. So then we get to the fourth point of the text, right? Damba Ngugi Lama Jidaturi Rimba, right? Damba Ngugi Lama Luma Lama Ngugi Lama Jidaturi Rimba Lani, right? So the actual instruction, the stages of leading the disciple. So that had Lamgitsawa Shenin Densu, so the way of relating to the teacher as the root of the path, and then Dene Lojida Jangwa. So after having, on the basis of relying on the teacher, then the stages of training in the path. So within this relating to the teacher, there's first Ngeperkepechir Jungze Trude Shepa. So in order to get some definite certainty about it, then a little bit of a digression, and then the actual way of relating to the teacher. That's later. That's actually quite short. So this little bit of a digression is then, as we see, then this is then divided into these 6 sections. That's where we are. First, Tencha, so the one to rely upon. So the definition of a qualified teacher. That's we're in the middle of that, right? And then we'll have Tenche Lometseni. So the disciple who relies on that teacher. What are the qualities the disciple should have? It's not enough for the teacher to be qualified. The disciple also has to, from their own side, have the right qualities, the right kind of relationship. And then Jitar Dempetsu, right? So the way that teacher guides that disciple. And then Dempepeyo, so the benefits of relying on a teacher. And then Medempenyemik, so the faults or the drawbacks of not relying on a teacher or not relying properly. So within the definition, it's this 10-part definition from the Dodigen, from Mahayana Suchalamkara. So if you remember this quotation, it was a couple pages back. Shenyen Duwa Shiwa Neshiwa. So the teacher, Duwa, is subdued by the training in morality, the ethical discipline, the higher training in ethical discipline. And then Shiwa is pacified by the higher training in concentration. And Nira Shiwa is very pacified by the higher training in wisdom. And then Yonel Hakpa, so then as superior qualities to the disciple. And then Sunche has energy to teach. And Lungi Chukpa is endowed with with scriptural quotations, but really has much learning is the idea. And then Deni Ratu Dokpa, so has properly realized things as they are. So really, especially relation of emptiness. And Make Den, so is skilled in teaching. And Sewe Dakni is in the naturally affectionate, meaning has compassion. And then Kyoe Pon, so they've abandoned sad discouragement. So they even if the disciple doesn't understand, they're not discouraged to keep teaching again and again. So we were right in the middle of one of the qualities here. We stopped with Yunin Lakpa, right? So that has superior qualities. So first there was this quotation from Tsom, right, from the Dharmapada, the Zajiki Tsom on the spiritual friend, and then right after that we have Puchungwa, right, Geshe Puchungwa, one of the early Kadam masters. So he's saying Puchungwe, Dampa Namgi Logyu Sensana Delani Ngayar Tawayin Sumpatang. So Dampa is like the great ones, all the great beings. Dampa Namgi Logyu. So Logyu can mean history, but here it means like their life stories, right? Sensana. So when I reflect on the life stories, I listen to the life stories of the great beings, and I look up to them. I see them as an example to be followed. So another Kadambagashi, Tajiba. Ngani Rajengwe Gepo Denam. So Rajeng was the monastery of the Kadam. It's the Gepo. When I look at the elders, right? Denamla Mikdenje. So I hold them as an example. It's like in modern colloquial Tibetans. I don't know if you know this term, mikpe ta. You'll see this in the monastery a lot, mikpe ta. So I think it actually I think in that case, I've never seen it written, but I think it's the mik from like miksel, right? Like mik to specify, and then pe, an example, and then look, example to be looked upon in the monastery. So they'll often say this. It's good to find mikpe ta, somebody that you can use an example. I think I'd like to cultivate those qualities. So he's saying he does that when he looks at the senior people at the monastery. She sumpatar, yonel lakbala mik yar tawashikoso. So you needed somebody of superior qualities to yourself, to whom you can look up to. To whom you can look up to. Who you can look up to. Something like that. To whom you can look up doesn't sound right, does it? Detar Chudrupadini. So these 6 qualities, right? So he went a little out of order, right? Because we have the list in Dodigan of the 10 qualities, and so Tsongkhapa listed them out of order because he was showing that the first 6 that he lists were qualities Rangi Tope Yonden, right? The qualities that the teacher themselves has achieved. And then Lakmani, the other 4, Shendiju Zimbe Yonden. So those are the 4 qualities of looking after the disciples. That's why he mixed up the order a bit so he could separate them out in terms of whether they're qualities of the teacher, in terms of their own personal qualities, or their qualities of how they guide disciples. So then, Deang Jikidu, so as it said, so many of you might know this quotation, which I don't know if we know where it's actually from. It says, they always say from the sutra, but it's hard to locate it in the sutra. So, Tupnan Dikpa Chui Mitru Shing, Joe Dugal Chagi Mizella, Nigi Dobashana Pomende, Shuni Dempena Bedro, Joritze. Right, so I had a translation of this. What was it? The sage does not the sage does. I had a way of translating it. Let's see. The sage can't wash our sins with water, nor dispel migrator's suffering with his hands, nor plant his realizations in our minds. By teaching Dharma's truth, he liberates. That's putting it in verse. Right, so it's that the Buddha does not wash away it's often said, does not wash away our sins with water or with his hands. He does not dispel the suffering of sentient beings, of migrators, or transplant his realization to another, but teaches the Dharma, and that is what liberates. So I mentioned before that some people quote this as reason that it shouldn't be about the devotion of the teacher, right? That the teacher, they can't just extricate your suffering like surgery. It's you that has to practice. But really, that shouldn't be understood as being contradictory to the fact that it's important to have a proper relationship with the teacher. It's just natural. We can understand. One thing I've found very helpful from living in the monastery many years, it's made me much more appreciative of my teachers when I was a child. I think back on it, and I remember I had one middle school teacher who was a very knowledgeable person, but a bit conservative in his way of speech and mannerisms, and so the students really disrespected him. I remember, and as a result, probably we didn't gain we didn't benefit from the relationship as we could have. He taught us a lot about the world. Actually, he taught us about Latin America. That was the course. I thought when I was in 7th grade, I thought Latin America. I thought we were going to be learning about Rome, but I didn't know what Latin America was. But he soon dispelled that misconception. And then we learned all about these different countries we'd never learned about. So remembering it, and now that we understand the importance of it, I appreciate it a lot more. And I think actually I benefit now looking back on it, even though at the time I wasn't maybe part of the group that was actively showing him disrespect. But of course, it rubs off on everybody. You kind of have this view as a middle school kid, the teacher, the very boring or the strict teacher. But if you appreciate their qualities, you just benefit from the relationship. There's no doubt about that. And it's even more so in a relationship with a spiritual friend, that you're trying to gain the qualities that this person has. And if you no matter how good the qualities of the person are, as Tsongkhapa will explain in a minute when he talks about the disciple, then if the disciple doesn't cultivate the proper view of them, then they won't see qualities. They'll only see faults. Even if the faults aren't there, or if the person does have some faults, they'll seize upon those as much more substantial than they actually are. So despite the fact that, of course, the teacher can't dispel despite this migrator's suffering with his hands, it doesn't mean that it's just that the teacher teaches and you take it and you go off on your own and you no longer have a relationship with the teacher. It's quite a major misconception. So, Shenla Lama Norratene. So, first you teach an unmistaken path, says it to the student. Jesu Zimba Mato Par. So then you teach an unmistaken path, and then you look after them. But chu churwa so charmeto. So you don't actually wash away their suffering with water. Right? Because if that was the case, then it wouldn't matter if the student was devoted or not. The teacher could just come and wash away the suffering. There'd be nothing that the student had to do from their own side. So de la chu shile. So there's 4 qualities that are of teaching others. Right? Makepani. So first is skilled in teaching. Jitarchawe rimbala keijing. So that's all it says. The stages of guiding the student is skilled. And dun Dulce Lola Kewala Zoho. So then so take the meaning of the teachings, delivering it into the student's mind. That's literally what it means. Kyalwa means to deliver. So into the trainee's mind, and then soa. So sort of train is, how do we say that? Soa here. Because soa can mean a number of things. It often means like to repay kindness. But also it can mean, I think the idea here is that they're able to pay back the students in the sense of, pay back isn't quite right, but just to do, to work after they've taught the teaching, then to be able to help them to develop those qualities, not just a matter of saying it one time, but looking after them over a period of time. So then sewa ni, right? So sewa is affection, right? So chu dumpe kunlong tapa de. So they have a pure motivation to teach the Dharma. Nyen kor soklami tower. So they're not looking for praise or for material gain. Jampa tang ning je kunelang de tompo. So they teach motivated by love and compassion. And then Potawa Shilne, so as Potawa has said, the Kadampa Geshe Potawa, so Chengala, so to Chengala, while the other Kadampa Geshe, he said to him, Limo Pu, so son of Limo, I must have been the son of a person named Limo. Chi Tsampe Chu Shechik Chede, Lexo Chikyang Dagi Cher.MO. So as much as I've taught in the past, I never had the experience of thinking I did a good job, Lexo. Droa Nyam Takpa Miba Me. There is no sentient being who is not destitute. So I think the idea is, how can you take pride in teaching when there's so many destitute sentient beings? It's like you go to a place where people are dying and you administer the medicine and you get pride. Oh, I'm such a great doctor. I cured these people. But there's these people who are dying. It's like generating pride about some destitute situation for someone. It's quite not a very it's not the suitable situation for feeling good about yourself or feeling that you're something special for what you're doing. It's a matter of doing it out of the compassion for the people. She sumpa drawashik gopa yinpa da. So he said you need to be like that. Tsongkhapa is saying that's what it seems that is what you should do. So that's that. He's saying that is what is meant by compassion in the context of the teacher. Right? They're not teaching out of a thought of how great I am, and they're teaching out of compassion for the suffering of the students. And then sunche ni, so then as for being endowed with effort. Right? So shengi donat troa demboho. So yeah, they rely on being taking enthusiasm or joy in the purpose of others. Right? What is it? Tera shengi donche kyang monso tani lom mi jung tani kini sesune lanla rewa mi jung shin. Right. So Shantideva says, so therefore, being single-pointedly taking joy in the benefit of others, without any sense of conceit or thinking how great I am for doing so. It's like if I eat a meal, I don't congratulate myself for having fed myself a good meal. It's just you feel a sense of, I want to be doing this. This is what I want. This is my purpose. So kyoa pawani. So taking abandoning discouragement in teaching. Yang yan chepe mingawade. So they're not tired out or wearied. Don't get wearied by saying the same thing over and over again. Chepe ka chepe sobaho. So they have the austerity, the forbearance of teaching. They're able to just keep teaching without feeling a sense of discouragement and tiredness. So now we've completed the 10 qualities, and then now Tsongkhapa just gives a few quotations about from the Kada masters again, and then he'll give a bunch from the Indian scriptures. So again, Potawa said, Lapa sung tang teni dopa tang ningtsewa nga so yin. So remember we had 10, right? So of those, the Lapa sung, so the Chinyan, Duwa, Shiwa, Nirshiwa, those first 3, the 3 higher trainings. And then Deni Dopa, so realizing emptiness, or at least having a correct understanding of how things are. And then Ningtsewa Nga So Yin, so then having compassion. So having 3 higher trainings, having realize things as they are and having compassion. So then he goes on to say, Ngengi Lopon Shangtsun, so his teacher, Shangtsun, Kunla Mangdu Tobayang Me. So he wasn't a very learned person. Kyowa Sopayan Mepe, he also couldn't put up with a lot of discouragement. He got pretty tired out when people didn't understand. And Lao Trindu Chakpa Re Chepayang. So Trindu Chakpa, like he didn't so it's meaning like, it says in the translation here, I was looking at it, it says he didn't even thank those who helped him. So it doesn't, it's unusual for somebody to speak that way about their teacher, but I think he's showing that wasn't what was so important. So Chipyam Mete, so trin to chakpa, right? So trin is kindness, and chakpa also is kind of having affection or having a sense of closeness with somebody. So Trepepe amete ngama nga but he had those first 5 qualities. He was had the 3 hard trainings. He understood how things are, and he had compassion. Yupe truna yopa truna su yopa pen. So whoever came before him, there was some benefit for them. Nyeltun la, so his other teacher Nyeltun, or Nyentun la ma kepe ye me. So he was not at all skilled in teaching. Ye me yun she re chepayang de kungi tare miko nyapale mishete ngayope kepa ye me yun shepa yun she re chepayang. This is, as I said, these old 12th century colloquial Tibetan is a bit terse. So let me look. Let's see. Yunshe Reichip. So Yunshe is an old term, right? Yun means offering in general, but it looks like in old Tibetan, Yun Shepa was like a dedication, right? You had what he dedicated at the end of the teaching. So Yunshe Reichip. So for each dedication he made, De Kungi Tare Miko Nyampa. He thought nobody understood my teaching. De Kungi Tare Miko. They don't understand. Mishete. So they don't understand what I'm talking about. But nga yupe su niela pen sungso. So, but he did have those first 5 qualities. So whoever was close to him, there was some benefit in that. So detarna lapa namla drupa lerlen mepar teraki ngapayang ngapaam yunajupe rangit so drupani geweshe sumiude. So yeah, the person who is like this is not suitable as the Gewe Shinyan. So Lapa Namla Drupa Ler Lempa Me. So first of all, they don't put a lot of effort into the trainings. Right? They don't in the ethical discipline, concentration, and wisdom. Ler Lempa is like putting a lot of effort into something. Ler Lempa Mepar. So within that, they're taking apayam, yundin jupe, rangit soa drupani. So yeah, they talk about the great qualities of those things, but they don't actually practice it themselves. And then they're just achieving by praising them. Then they make their livelihood that way. So they make a livelihood out of praising great qualities that they themselves don't cultivate. So that person is not suitable as a teacher. Sending ngapa jupe so drupala sending dun dunya wada gashiki. And so let's start sending ngapa, right? They sending ngapa jupe. They praise sandalwood, this person. And as a result, they make their livelihood that way by praising sandalwood. So some people who are wishing to obtain sandalwood, so then they ask, well, do you have sandalwood? And he says, Meido. So I don't have any. So it's like that. The person praises these qualities, but they ask, well, do you have those qualities yourself? Oh, no, I don't practice that myself. Say, don't mepa. So then it's pointless. Seek some de gyurwe chirde. So then it becomes just mere words. So ting is in Gyalpule, as it says in the King of Samadhi Sutra. Chime dula gelong ni dompa meba mampo da. So in future times, there will be many gelongs who don't have vows, dompa meba mampo da, or at least don't restrain themselves. Maldu topa dak du gyur, so that they want to learn a lot. Sulchum ngapa juche la, and they praise morality. Sulchum dondu nirma me, but they don't actually make any effort in ethical discipline. We were talking the other day about, but sometimes there's a concern. Is it the case that people the Sangha doesn't follow the discipline anymore? But personally, I think really studying the Vinaya the past few years and just examining everything for many years, I don't know if it's really that much different than it ever was. When we read about the disciples of the Buddha, seeing the things people did in the Vinaya, when we read about the inspiring stories, which is usually what you read when you read about Buddhism, then you see all the great arhats and the great disciples. But when you read the Vinaya, you see all the things people did wrong. And there's this one argument that they were having. Sonawa, Kunkin Sonawa is, of course, the author of our textbooks on Vinaya. And so there's this question of whether do you receive the Pratimoksha vow if you don't have a mind of renunciation when you take the vow. It doesn't mean you have to have uncontrived renunciation, but if you don't have the sense, I'm doing this for the purpose of liberation. And he says, yes, you do. And so the first reason he gives the quotation, the examples of people in the time of the Buddha who was clear they did not have renunciation. They were ordaining for various other reasons, like to get food, because the Sangha had people who were poor, and then the Sangha could at least be supported. But then he says also, if it was the case that you needed renunciation, well, there are so many monks these days who don't have renunciation, so then they wouldn't have vows, and then we couldn't say that teachings still remain in Tibet. But then the first Dalai Lama, Gelong, his other textbooks, that's our secondary textbook, is his book. He says, so he often says kachik, and it's Kunkin Sonawa. But he doesn't say Sonawa no re, he just says kachik. He says somebody says that that nowadays monks don't have renunciation, and therefore you don't need renunciation to get the vows. And he says, what is it? Don't denigrate. Don't look at your own mind and based on that denigrate the Sangha. So sort of a side. How do you say a indirect way of criticizing him, perhaps, but I don't know. I don't think. I mean, we know with the way they direct these debate texts, it's not that they're really. I'm sure he had a lot of respect for Sonawa because he was Tsongkhapa's student, and Tsongkhapa himself said, Sonawa was one of the greatest scholars in Tibetan history, and it's because of him that we don't need to write any more text on Vinaya because he already wrote all that needed to be written. But nevertheless, this is just the points they make, and so Galwagenda Drup was saying, actually, I think people do practice very well. But we see even then, there was obviously lots of concerns. So sometimes, of course, there are times when things go up and down, things change. So there can be some generations where there's maybe less adherence to things, but even now, it's quite extraordinary. I was thinking about it this morning at Gache, seeing 3,000 people maybe, maybe even more, and in one room, all practicing a Vinaya ritual, and looking at. I was quite nice to see there were some quite young Gelongs around me. I wanted to ask them how old they were. I didn't ask them, but it was quite nice to see these young Tibetan men who they decided to become Gelong. There's one monk from over at the house group of last year's Gecko, who you remember was so strict, right? This young monk when he was in the school, because I remember when he was growing up, I would watch him sometimes. He just looked very unrestrained. I would have to say, he just looked, like a kid, and he still looks quite like a kid. He's still probably, I can't imagine he's over 25. He's probably 20. But I remember at the beginning of this year, he was sitting in front of me in Sojong, and I noticed, and I asked him, when did you become Gelong? He said, I just went to see His Holiness at the beginning of this year. So it was nice to see. He's in Dura class, I think. So he certainly didn't have to ordain as a Gelong, but he wanted to. Maybe he probably had a very good relationship with last year's Gecko, so we can see that for some people that approach was very effective for their minds. So to think there are people doing this these days, it's quite amazing. We see throughout history, as I said, that there were periods of time in Tibet, like after Long Dharma, when the teachings were in a bit of a decline and there was a lot of misunderstandings. So people weren't practicing properly, and there were lots of things going on these days then like that are similar to what we hear these days. We hear about people teaching as monks and wearing robes, even though they have a consort, things like that. But that's exactly what was happening when Atisha came to Tibet. It's not like it's anything new. It's just people have misunderstandings. And as I said, at the time of the Buddha, there was plenty of funny things going on. No need for me to share them. I can share them maybe separately, but I feel a little funny. We have the camera going. Better that we if anyone is interested, we can talk about it. But it's you just see there's human beings. That was also something that was very helpful. Always Jampa Kelton had that perspective of bringing these things down to earth. Just remembering that these are human beings practicing these. You read in the text, and it makes it sound like everything was perfect. This person was enlightened when they were born, but it's pretty unusual for that kind of thing to happen. Most people they have to learn in each lifetime. Anyway, so Che Tingizin Shera Namdril Lam Namdril Sumlayang. So we have the three higher trainings. Tingizin Shera. Oh, sorry, that's not the three. They have Tingizin, right? So the concentration, and then Shera, wisdom, and then Namdril, right? So the liberation. Sumlayang Detar Sungne. So it's saying he says this. Okay. So this text right here in Tingizin Gyalpo, right? The king of Samadhi. He said, he was saying in terms of there'll be people in future times who praise morality even though they don't practice it. So then he implies it to the other three. There'll be people who praise concentration, who praise wisdom, who praise liberation even though they don't themselves put it into practice. So after having said that, then the text says, Jitar Kebu Lala Dak. So there's just some people, Senden Dagni Dinder Day. So it's the example he just gave. They have sandalwood. Pugi Namba Yongshe. So they say this is just such great, nice material for incense. Senden Dagi Yundin Ju. And they praise all the great qualities of sandalwood. Dene Mishan Lala Yi. So then some other people come along and say, Detar Ngapa Jupa Yi. Senden Jungse Seldom She. So they say, are you keeping any of this great sandalwood that you keep praising? And Kebu Lale Ditri Na. So they ask him that. Kebu de la Larme. So then he responds to them. Gangi Tsor Chepa Hi Pugi Ngapa Jupa De Pudding Ala Me Chemel. So they said, this sandalwood that I've been praising to you as a great material for incense. No, I don't have any. Dejin Nalger Mitsun Ba. So likewise, it's these people who don't put any effort into yoga. Sulchung Ngape Tsoadak. So they praise the qualities of morality and they make a living that way. Chime Duna Jungyurde. So such people will come along in the future. Deda Lani Sulchung Me. So they don't have morality, these people, ethical discipline. So then again, he applies it to the other three: concentration, wisdom, and liberation. So de tar namdril dupe lamani. So a teacher who is actualizing liberation. Dengi dume tsawa yimpe. Dengi dume tsawa yimpe. Right? Okay. I think what this is, no, it's not the teacher who is actualizing liberation. Namdil drupa, right? So this is important. Sometimes people miss this when they translate, we've seen. The word drupa, right, it's a verb, but oftentimes in text, it can make a noun, the person who is practicing. So those people who are practicing for liberation, they're Lama. The Lama of the person who's practicing, who's actualizing liberation, Dengi Dumet Sawayimpe. That Lama is the very root of their Dengi Duma means your stable aspiration, but yeah, it's like the thing that you're ultimately aiming for, right? There's a better translation they have for it, I forget. I think in Three Principal Aspects of the Path, right? I think they translate it as ultimate destiny, something like that. It's at the last verse, right? Like, now, therefore, my son, please achieve your ultimate destiny, which isn't really quite quite right, but it's sort of, the thing that you're ultimately wanting. It's this, the root of that is your teacher. So Lama Tempar Tulpa Namgi, so all those people who want to rely properly on their teacher, Namgi ni Terashe Parchala, so they should all know that. Senitan Dempat Soala Paper Charging, so then I should make effort in searching for a teacher who's qualified. Lomar Demper Dupa Namgi Kyang, so also all those students, actually, I think it might be saying Loper Demper Dupa Namgi Kyang Derashe Perchene Seni Dakta. Yeah. So all of you who are looking for students to rely on you, I think is what it's saying. Those who want students to rely on you, you should also know these qualities and make an effort to cultivate them in yourself. So then, so we're still actually, there's a paragraph break here, but it's not the end of the section. So then it goes on. Dugi Wangi Donden Yunin Dedak Sawar Nipa Kawe. So based on the times, sometimes in different periods of time, it can be very difficult to find someone who fulfills all of those qualities. So Detar Manina, so if you don't find such a person, Jidar Chashina, so what should you do? So it says in Pungsungi Shupa. So Pungsungi Shupa is the tantra requested by Subahu. So it's one of the 4 main action tantras. Samdin Chima, Lekpa Drupa, Pungsungiju. I forget the 4th one. There are 4 main action tantras that are explanatory tantras that Tsongkhapa relied upon for understanding action tantra. So anyway, this is a very extensive one. It has a lot in it about the spiritual, relating to the spiritual teacher. So from this tantra, it says, and also in case you're confused, the tantra, right? We have the word sutra and tantra. So those of you who have studied Chongkol already, right? You have ka, Sanghi ka, right? Teaching, there's the word of the Buddha. And then you have do. So do, sutra, is understood in that context. It's a teaching that is given, it's a ka that is given by a supreme emanation body, is do. And then, so gyu, tantra, is actually also a do in general. But it's a do gyu nisuchepe gyu, right? And you divide them in terms of sutra and tantra. Mm-hmm. Then you have the sutra teachings and the tantra teachings. So the sutras are the ones that are sutra and the ones that are tantras. But generally, they're teachings that are taught by the Buddha. What distinguishes the two is the Yongsu Dapa Shi. I think I mentioned this to you last week. So you have the 4 purities, that you purity of abode, of body, of activities, and of enjoyments, right? So then those are the things that you'll achieve when you're a Buddha. But in Tantra, that you bring them into the path now. So if you visualize now that I have those things are actually manifest now, and use that as part of your path, then what makes it a Tantra, if it teaches a method for doing that. So in the context of action Tantra, right, it's not highest yoga Tantra where it's taking desire it is taking desire into the path actually, but not in the same way, and it's not actualizing the subtle levels of mind. Right? You don't actualize the clear light and so forth, but it is using this imagination of oneself and one's surroundings as pure, and it is taking desire into the path in a more a much less advanced way. So that's why you visualize when you make offerings, for example, you visualize all these wonderful things. You're taking the inspiration you get from imagining all these wonderful offerings. Anyway, so we have Jitar Kolo Chikbe Shingtani. So just as a chariot with one wheel. Ta Tandeyan Lamdu Midrotar. So although there's a horse, it can't go on a road because it only has one wheel. Dejin Drupahini Dropmena. So likewise, if you don't have friends in your practice, so meaning especially here, I think it's meaning spiritual, like teachers, but also could mean companions in your practice. So then beings will not achieve attainments. Deni loden zugzang sangdrache. So then an intelligent person with a good body or attractive body and very clean, rikni tsunjing chola shivatang. So they're of a good lineage and they make effort in the Dharma. Popa cheshing, they're very courageous. Pala wawatu, so they're courageous, and those both can mean courageous. Popa and pala. Maybe popa mean like bold. They're bold to teach. They're not just reserved. They're willing to teach. And pala, they have a heart of courage. Wanghodu, so they've subdued their faculties. Nyambar majing, and they are they speak well. They speak in pleasant speech. Jinpu Mingje-chen, so they're generous. Jinpu, it means they dare to give, and they're willing to give. Mingje-chen, they're compassionate. So in this context, right, it says they are of a good lineage. I think it should be understood as they're of the lineage of the Buddha, right? It doesn't have to be that the person is a Brahmin. That's pretty clear in the Buddha's teachings, that it's not a matter of person's birth, how qualified of a teacher they are. So then, tre tang kom tang yomon supatang. So they're willing to put up with hunger and thirst and afflictions in order to be able to teach. Tramze tani shenchu miche lajen chu miche. So they don't make offerings to Brahmins or other gods, meaning they don't take them as objects of refuge. They take the Buddha as the refuge, the three jewels. Drinjing Sula, I think Drin means to focus. I'm forgetting now. Drin. And then Zula Chepa Zubatang, Kontrok Sumla Depa Dropo Yin. So one who has faith in the three jewels, that is a friend. Let me just check that one.
In Drin, I have a note.
Yeah, what's your note say?
Le shor mepe mingo.
Le shor.
Yeah.
Le shor, like not losing work. They don't give up the work.
No, it's like la tembole sak shana shor.
Yeah, that would mean like they don't give up their work.
Mm-hmm.
They don't give up.
Yeah.
Hold on. Yeah, focus. That's what I thought it was. Focused. Because it's dream also, right? Which is focused. But dream also means focused. Yeah. And then adept, right? Zula, they're adept. Because you have like Zoa Kepa, somebody who's adept in skilled in things. And so this is what's confusing. Sola Chepa, Zoatang. You have Zoa, I mentioned this before, this word can mean paying back kindness, right? So here, you having the same word mean two things. Probably in Sanskrit, they were two different words, is my guess, because this is a translation of the Sanskrit text. But as I may have mentioned before, the translators were often very literal. So they would use they would have a standard word that they would use to translate. So if zu was the translation of whatever word in Sanskrit, they would not change that. So even though it's very awkward in one sentence to have the same word mean two different things, that was kind of the system. They had to do it that way. So you have chunjing zu, so the first zu, so the chepa is zu la, so zu la, and then la is like a contraction. So they're skilled, and then chepa zoa, so they repay what people do for them. People help them, and then they repay it. Right, so it's translated here as grateful in the translation, but the idea is that they're willing to pay back kindness that's shown to them. And Nyomong Zuba, right? I'm forgetting the word, but it's from also from Chunjuk, right? Sedan sheso dranamni kanlan yazo mizenla pazem minyam tishiktar dadak anani jinshin she gagu rangi semnepa and then I'm missing one line, but then he says, Dilamiso trupani, Dilamitro zupani nemen supamepe ne. Right? So he says, well, as long as these afflictions abide in my mind without any restraint, this is not a cause for patience. This is a cause for anger. Right? So he's saying, don't just be patient with your afflictions. You should apply the antidote. So here, when he's saying be patient with afflictions, he's meaning with others' afflictions, right? Not with your own. But I think that's always a good point to bring up, because there was one very nice point that was made by a Theravadan teacher that I was reading his work. I forget who it was, but I remember it was a Theravadan teacher. And he was saying that people in the West, they have this idea that in Buddhism you practice contentment. And they think that means that you just think, well, I'm okay however I am. Whatever, I'm just accept myself as I am. I mean, it doesn't mean you have to hate yourself. That's certainly not the point. But it's a misunderstanding. The Buddha was saying, you're content with just enough requisites to get by. You don't need more and more things. But you shouldn't just think I'm okay as I am. It's just how I am. You should actually be very impatient with your mind being full of afflictions and want to change the situation. It's not a desirable situation. So likewise, when he's saying patience with afflictions, it should be understood that you're patient when other people are making mistakes. You're patient with that. So data yonde malu dembardak. So people who are endowed with all of those qualities, sunpe duna shindu kumpe na. So in this time of strife, it's like these days, they're very rare these days. Yonden chedam shicha gechachen. So even if they have half of those qualities, or 1/4, or they're even just one, dedabuni ngape dropoden. So you should rely upon such a teacher or such a friend, because that's such a thing, even in and of itself. Well, actually, ngape. So ngape is mantra, right? It's not praise. A mantric practitioner should rely upon such a person, because of course this was a tantra, right? The tantra requested by Subahu. So he's saying a mantric practitioner should rely on such a friend. Say drokla seni yonzo sumpe gechala matar suma. So he's saying, at the very least, these teachers should have at least one of those 8 qualities, or 1/8 of the qualities. That's the point. It's not there were 10 qualities, but it's like even a fraction, even just 1/8 of that. De Lama ilayang sung so she jo Chenpo sumpa potawe sung dre due dikbale shepe. So dua was a Gache. He wrote it down. Jikba is a sungdro. It's a saying of Potawa, which was that Atisha said this. It's a bit complicated. So Doa wrote down that Potawa was known to have said, that Atisha had said, that it's similar for the Lama, right? That a Lama. Okay, so I think the point is, it is in this context, it is about friends, that it's like your spiritual companions. But he's saying it's also similar for your Lama. Atisha was saying, for your Lama, it's the same. Even if they have some fraction of those qualities, it's something worthwhile. So seni du sumpa yonsu zobe sawa namgi kala chudik bar. So however hard or easy it might be to find somebody who fulfills all of those qualities, depe gecha tandeba mata chao. So take it as the very least that they have at least 1/8 of those. As I said, I think in the middle length LAM.RIM, I think I mentioned this last week, that he says the most important thing is that they have superior qualities in some regard, right? If you're superior to the teacher in every single way, then there's not a whole lot to be gained from relying on them. But if there's some quality that they have that you want to cultivate, then you can learn a lot from them. So like I mentioned, my middle school teacher, maybe he was a bit of a boring guy, but he had some very good knowledge. And so if we as students had tried to focus on that and learn from that, then you can learn a lot, even if the teacher might not have other qualities that you think, personally, that's not how I'd like to be. But it doesn't mean that as long as they're not harmful to you, then you can still benefit from the relationship. Okay, so that's good for this week. And then, yeah, if anyone has questions. No? Okay. Yeah, okay, then we can do dedication.
Sajibugi Chushimnedo Taridanishi Nilegem Hadi Sanyeshindu Mite Urahim Drogunandajila Chupashojetsulame Kutseraten Chinakachine Chochugye Padam Lozam Tempe Drume Sazungi Droe Munzeptatu Negyujidam Guru Rama Mandalagani Yodayomi. From my true collections,
Both the states that I have amassed from working with effort and this practice for a great length of time. I have become the chief leading Buddha for those whose minds blinded by ignorance. If I did not reach the state, maybe with the loving compassion for all my lives, Manjushri, finally give us a complete getting past the teachings, and I make complete all the Buddhas by practice. Use the means strong with the strong force of compassion, may fill the minds of all beings with the points of the path as I have discerned them. My heart Buddha's teachings for a very long time.
With my heart and out with great compassion.
In whatever direction the most precious teachings are not yet spread, or spread have declined, may I expose the treasure of happiness and aid. May the minds of those who wish for liberation be guaranteed bounteous peace, and the Buddha's needs be nourished for a long time. May with this graded path to enlightenment, completed to the wonders and virtuous conduct of the Buddhas and their sons.
May all human
beings who live in adversity, may them soon to the paths, never be separated in all their lives from the purest path praised by the Buddhas. Whenever makes an effort to act in accordance with the Mahayana virtuous practices, it was assisted by the mighty ones, and the oceans of prosperity spread everywhere.